On behalf of the Board of Trustees and Dr. Carl Detloff and the administrative staff of San Angelo Independent School District, we want to welcome you all tonight to our special presentation. You know, the Equity Center has been in existence for over 30 years now, and today there are more than 700 districts across the state that belong to this outstanding organization that continues to advocate for the fair and equitable treatment of not only Texas taxpayers but our students as well. Now, while most people associate the Equity Center with poverty-poor school districts, I can tell you firsthand from my 17 or 18 years of administrative experience, I've seen these guys fight for the fair treatment of all children in the state of Texas, all 5.2 million of them, regardless of the zip code that they reside in. And so I believe that they are truly champions for children. So, you know, it's our pleasure and our honor, actually, tonight to host this event. And as we get a good lesson in school finance and unlocking the mysteries of the school funding system here in Texas. And so without further ado, it is again my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Wayne Pierce and Dr. Ray Freeman. So help me welcome them.
Thank you. I'm Wayne, and the other half of the road show is Ray, and the brains of the outfit is Deidre over there, and we're really appreciative of y'all giving us the time tonight to come out. This has been out to San Angelo to present in different schools over the years, and I always enjoy it, and I appreciate your dedication to the children. We're going to talk about several things. Let it be informal. If you want to interrupt me at any point and make a comment or ask a question or clarification or even to disagree. I've been married for 48 years and I'm used to being disagreed with. I don't fight it anymore. I've learned where I fit into the scale of things, so just feel free to weigh in there if you have anything you'd like to add. So that's one of my favorite pictures. That's the way we ought to feel about public schools. We're just going to take off and go. And we're going to start by talking a little bit about the litigation. And I'm going to kind of home in on some of the more crucial parts of it. But first I want to give you some reasonable definitions of some key terms. We talk all of the time in the Constitution about the general diffusion of knowledge. That's what the state is required to provide, a system that provides a general diffusion of knowledge. And sometimes we refer to it as GDK, and we get so used to saying it that we'll say it without thinking about whether individuals know what GDK is or not. But it's the same as saying something is adequate for us to achieve the goals. Now, you could tell me that you have an adequate amount of gasoline in your car, but is that adequate for you to get from here to the next filling station? Or is it adequate for you to get from here to your home? Or is it adequate for you to take me all the way back down to Austin? See, those are questions about what is adequate and what isn't. And that's part of the trouble with this phrase in the Constitution, is because we really don't know what is adequate. What does it actually cost to provide this general diffusion of knowledge? And so the Supreme Court said, well, if you're accredited, then you're adequately funded. We're going to let that be the definition of GDK. Well, most districts are. Virtually all districts are within the state's accreditation standards. But then they added, but you cannot set accreditation standards so low and then set standards really high and say this is a general diffusion of knowledge when you're expecting this up here. So it can't be lower than what the state's own goals. And this is what the state's goal is. This is one of their goals. All children will be college and workforce ready when they graduate from high school. All children. Not just a few, not just a good many, but all children. Now, when you say college ready, that sounds like it's really a high level. But the definition of college ready in this sense is having a 60% chance of making a C in an entry-level college course. That's not really a very high standard. That's as far as being college ready, having a 60% chance of making a C in an entry-level college course. So we're not talking about pie-in-the-sky type goals. Now, I want to point out to you also, we compete on a global basis. So world class must be the standard, and that's what we should be shooting for. But the district court found that only a third of the economically disadvantaged graduates were college ready, rather only a third of the economically disadvantaged ones, and only half of the general population is college ready. All right, now, San Angelo and many of you in here were in the Texas Taxpayer and Student Fairness Coalition. And that was the group that we were associated with. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of things that were brought up, and then we'll move on. The Supreme Court, back in 1993, when there was another school finance litigation called Edgewood 4, they established that $3,500 per weighted student. Now, what a weighted student is this. If I'm in a program, say that I come from low socioeconomic status and you have to do more for me in order to get me up to the level you want. And let's say it costs 20% more money in order to do that, then I would be a 1.2 WADA. One student, 1.2 WADA, because it costs 20% more. So this is the deal back at that time. The wealthiest districts with 15% of students could get there to $1.22 tax rate. That's back when it was a $1.50 cap. And the poorest districts could get there to $1.31. Now just look at those two numbers. That's to get to $3,500. Everybody getting to the same place. That's a 9-cent differential. That's very key. They said that's not equitable. It's not exactly even, but 9 cents. And you've got 19 cents more than that for enrichment. So you've got room to go beyond a general diffusion of knowledge. So we're going to call this thing constitutional. Well, what we did was we took the $3,500 from that court case and we applied inflation only. There's a formula that you can use. And we forgot about the increased standards. The standards are much higher now than they were in that time. And we just said, no, we're not even going to try to cost out what the increased standards are. We're just going to take that $3,500 and give it some inflation. And this is what we came up with. $6,576. That was in 2012. That's equivalent to about $7,000 per weighted student, not per student, per weighted student. And that is much higher than what those of you in the room are getting for your children. Well, that's what we came up with, and the state did not contradict any of it. They didn't contradict any of it. So then we took that, the calculations the Supreme Court itself used back in Edgewood 4, and we forgot about that there's a $1.17 cap, which you cannot forget about, by the way. You cannot go above $1.17. But we said, let's just forget about that. Let's say you can go above $1.17, and let's assume that the state is going to continue to equalize even on those pennies above $1.17. So we're bending over backwards to be fair to the state. And this is what we found out. $1.31 to raise that amount. If you're in the poorest 15%, you can't go above $1.17. 94 cents if you're in the wealthiest, and you remember that 9-cent differential is now 37 cents, and you have no room left for enrichment. As a matter of fact, you can't even get there within the $1.17. As a matter of fact, 80% of the districts in the state of Texas, which includes about half of the Chapter 41 districts, cannot raise a general diffusion of knowledge within the $1.17. Now, there's one comparison they made in the most recent litigation, West Orange Co. decision, and they talked about the top and bottom 5% of students. And they said that this was allowable, a $1,678 gap in 2003, and they said it's constitutional. It's getting pretty tight, but we're going to say it's constitutional. That's okay. So when we recalculated it for the second phase of the trial, what we found was that gap, that $1,600, had nearly doubled during that period of time. That's a $100,000 classroom gap. Talking about a typical elementary classroom of 22 kids, it's about $100,000, depending on the district. You can do a lot with $100,000 per classroom. You can do a lot. And one thing you can do is you can lower your taxes back to the state average. Here's the state's response to that. They said, you can't look at the studies. You can't look at the inequities and the unfairness. You've got to look at results. And if the results are good, if the kids are doing well, then you're providing a general diffusion of knowledge. It doesn't make any difference what the studies say you should be spending. And so one of the justices, and during these oral arguments, said, well, we've looked at those results. It's in the record, and they're really pretty pitiful. And the state said, you got to ignore all of that stuff. Trust us, because our goals are to have people college ready, all of our students college ready. And you have to judge us not on what schools are able to do today, but what our goals are for the future, because we're in transition. Now, if your scores came back on your STAR test and they were really poor, do you think you could get by telling the commissioner, hey, I know our scores are bad, but you can't look at our scores today because we're in transition. Our goals are really high. That's what we want to be held accountable for, what our goals are. Well, that's exactly what the state is saying. And they just do not want to be held accountable. They like holding you accountable. They don't care so much about being held accountable. So does the legislature have, if we're successful in court, does the legislature have any money to work with? In this budget, this last spring, that's how much money they had coming in that they did not spend. $6.4 billion. Now, how many years do they have left in this? After this year, they only have 1 year left. So we're not talking about funding for 2 years. We're talking about funding for 1 year. That's how much, if that works there, $2.9 billion is not even up to the spending cap that they set. They've put a cap on it to keep expenditures low. We're still $2.9 billion below that. And in their fund balance, they expect to have about $11 billion. They have enough money to do anything that they want to, anything they're committed to. Now, I want to show you something. You're hearing a lot about recapture, and if you talk to people, the first thing they'll say, well, we got to do something about recapture. And I want to say this right now, no, you don't. We all are being recaptured, and it's necessary because we're all in this state system. And I want to show you some animation. I pray to God I can show you some animation because I'm not very good at this, and it could just freeze up on me. So let's see if we get lucky. That red box is what the foundation school program provides through the formulas for your district. That's what the formulas say you should get. Enough money to fill that red box. Now, it's a partnership between state and local. There's a local share, that's your local taxes that you collect, and there's a state share. That's from the Foundation School Fund. They send that to you. And that's the partnership. So you set your tax rate, you collect your money, the state gives you some more money, and all together you fill up your box. Well, let's say over the years you get a little bit wealthier and you're bringing in a little more money. Well, what happens is this. The state takes the extra money that you brought in, and you see what they're doing with their money? They're recapturing it. They're taking that extra money, they're taking your extra money and they're using it in place of what they were providing. So it's a bookkeeping recapture, and it's very quiet, and nobody really says anything about it because, it's the way it is. It's necessary to be that way, but that's recapture. You just don't get the credit that some others do. So let's say you go to another year and you're bringing in even more money. What happens? Same thing. Now you're bringing in the orange, and the state's share is the little green there. Now here's the part that we all know about. What happens if you bring in more money than your total box? In other words, you're one of the wealthy districts and you bring in all this money. Well, first thing is that whatever the state gives, they quit giving you. So you're bringing in all of that. But what about that money that's left over? You have even more money. Well, part of it, through calculations, there's formulas, and it's pretty complex. There's whole harmlesses and different kickbacks and reductions. It's recaptured. And they make a big deal about it. It's not that little old simple slipping back into the general fund, and it's even now, they tell you to the dollar how much we've been recaptured. Well, everybody's been recaptured, not just wealthy districts. But it's out front because they write a check. You don't write a check. It's quiet. It's kind of like stealth recapture. Well, there's even more money left. What happens to that money? Well, there's different things that are in our system that lets them get more than their orange box that you are stuck with. You can get more than that, and that's one of the reasons they have some golden pennies that are not recaptured, so they get more than what a district in the system would get. And there's also prior year values which can hurt or help, but generally over time, the wealthier you are, the more that you accelerate. And it benefits you better as a wealthy district than a less wealthy district. Also, there's available school fund, the per capita money that comes from the investments, the land that was set aside 150 years ago for schools. Now, everybody gets that. It's in the Constitution that everybody gets it. They get it on top. Now, that's the foundation program. You get it down there, but not extra. You just get it as part of your state funding. So you don't benefit from it at all. It's kind of like I'm going to give every one of you $5, but I owed you 10. So I give you 10 and I say, hey, that 5's in there. And that's kind of the way that works. But back to this other, there's another sliver there called early agreement kickbacks or credits that they get to have a little extra money there when they pay recapture. There's another one. They get high school allotment on top of their funding. And they also get the new instructional facilities allotments on top too. They get target revenue and other hold harmlesses and outside the system funding on top of that. And INS is on top of that because there's no recapture on INS. Now, that box right there above the orange, that's the difference in funding. All of those things add up. They're not cost-based. They're not based on cost. This part's based on cost. This part right here is in addition to that. It's just money they throw out on the table, and they say, well, I hope whoever needs it gets it. And I don't doubt that these districts need some more money, because that box can be really big for some, it can be just a little bit big for some, but I don't doubt that they generally need that money. But what about these districts that are down here? Why don't they need the money? I've had friends that work in these districts, and they tell me that, well, you know, if we're brought down to this level here, what we bring y'all up a little bit, if we're brought down to that level, we'll have a mediocre school system statewide. It will be pathetic. Well, if something up here is mediocre, what is that? That's unconscionable, isn't it? Now, I'm going to talk to you about two things. One of them is non-cost based, has nothing to do with cost, and the other one has to do with a cost that's not recognized by the state that impacts some of you in here. If you've heard about target revenue and ASETAR, which is money that people get because they were getting it back in 2005-06, and we fund by habit. You were getting it back there. Promise was made that we're always going to give you the money you were getting in 2005-06, which wasn't a promise. The legislature in 2005 cannot obligate the legislature in a later year. Everybody knows that. So whenever you take that additional state aid, there are 59 school districts in the state that get $1,000 per weighted student extra on top of everything else that I showed you. That's their ASETAR. This is what they would get in the funding formulas. The people who don't get ASETAR, they're over here. Now that's already, that green there is already bigger than that because of the things I just showed you. But look what it is with ASETAR. Look at that. They say they can't do with less than that. But look at their tax rate. How many of you have a tax rate less than $1? Look over here, the people who are getting the lease, look at their tax rate on average. And many of you in here have $1.17. Well, there's another thing in the small schools formula. There's a diseconomy of scale, and it's recognized in formulas as it should be. But they have two formulas. One is for districts that have more than 300 square miles, which they should get. And then they have a lower one, a punitive one, for districts with less than 300 square miles. They call them small by choice. You can consolidate if you don't have more than 300 square miles. So we're going to penalize you, so they made a lower formula. And then somebody, this is back in the early 80s, somebody reneged on their promise to vote for a tax bill to fund this educational bill with this and a lot of other things. And so they wanted to punish him so that other people wouldn't back out of voting for this tax increase that was necessary for this big omnibus school finance bill. Well, when they did that, they took another 50% penalty on top of the ones that they were already giving them, just because of what happened by one person who's no longer in the legislature in a district way off on the other side of the state 30-something years ago, and they've been punishing children ever since. Now, if you were to look at, I'm not going to get into the details of how the formulas look, but if you can read that, that is really small. That's $5,700. This is what they say that these districts have, and you can have higher tax rates and that sort of stuff. I just sorted them by low to high, but that doesn't mean that these get a better deal. It may be their $1.17. If you took into consideration the penalty, this is what they're actually getting. Now I'm going to give you an example here. Very best, that's what on paper it looks like they're getting. That's what they're actually getting. So it looks like they're getting over $6,000, but they're actually getting a little over $5,300 per WADA. It doesn't show up because of the penalty, but that's what's happening to the children at that school district. Here's Lone ISD, same thing. They're getting a little less than $5,300. Anyway, those are all Region 15 districts, and I can give you all of that report if you're interested in it. Now, I'm going to show you something here. The average M&O tax rate in the state in 2014-15, this past year, was 1.0751. That is the statewide average M&O tax rate. This is the statewide average INS tax rate for districts that actually have an INS tax rate. That is your total. So what we did is we put everybody in the state, we put them at those tax rates, and then we ran our model to see how much money they would get so we can take the differences in tax effort off the table. So how does this system that's supposed to be efficient, transparent, how does this system fund different school districts? So we've got something here that we'll show you, and it's all right. Now let me explain to you what we got. I took several groups. These are the attendees on the list that we were sent previously, and I don't think it includes everybody, but this is the attendees that were on that original list. These numbers here belong to all of the districts in Tom Green County. These are all of the districts in Region 15, and this is San Angelo ISD, our host, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here. I don't know if I guess you do know, you got outstanding people working for you here. You're very fortunate. Jeff is one of the most knowledgeable people in the state on school finance, and he's been a big help to us in some of the fights that we've been doing. Let's say that we're going to compare, this is M&O tax rate sorted by wealth. How do you compare with the top 50%? Well, this is the average funding per WADA, the top 50% for San Angelo, for the state. This is the average, this is San Angelo ISD average. This one right there is the average for Region 15 districts. This is the average for Tom Green County districts. Remember, we're all at the same tax rate, so there's no difference in tax rates because we ran it that way. And those in attendance, this is your average. Right below that are the gaps. The difference between the top 50% average in San Angelo is $640 per WADA. If you took a classroom, a typical elementary classroom of 22 kids, that is how much San Angelo is getting below the top 50% average. Going on down, Region 15 is getting about $22,000 below the state average. Tom Green County, about $25,000, and the attendees in general is right at $27,000. Now you think about that. That's per classroom of 22 kids. Doesn't that just boggle your mind? And that's compared to the top 50% of districts. There's over 500 districts that we're comparing there. How about let's go to 70%? Is that working? We're still at M&O tax rate? Okay, go up one more, see what happens. Yeah. It's working backwards. It's the top 75% you're showing, not 70, the top. I should have said instead of 70, I should have said the top 30. All right, so at 70%, when you cut off there and look at the 30% above that, those are the classroom differences. It's over $1,000 per weighted student. Those are the classroom differences in those four groups. All right, let's go to the top 20%. I'll say it right this time. I'm sorry. So you're taking all the 80% out. You're looking just at the average for the top 20%. Now, why in an efficient system would you need to have $40,000 more for every typical elementary classroom of 22 kids? You take your district, you take all of your ADA, you divide it by 22, and that multiplied by that number is how much you're being shorted. All right, let's just for fun, let's go to the top 10%. If you were funded the way the average district in the top 10% of districts was funded, if you were funded that way for every classroom of 22 kids, you would have San Angelo, $71,000 more dollars. General attendees, it works out to about $100,000. What if Ross Perot walked in here, or whoever the modern equivalent of Ross Perot, and he came in and he said, I got a check for you. I got this stack of checks, and for every one of your classrooms of 22 kids, San Angelo, you're going to get $71,000. Would that make the front page of the paper? That'd be a big story, wouldn't it? Attendees, $100,000 for every 22 kids. And then he said, and I'm going to come back next year, and I'm going to give you another check for the same amount, and the year after that, forever. That's what our system does. It picks winners and losers, and the difference is massive. And the people who are getting these higher numbers, they will fight like heck. They did in the trial. They hired lawyers, spent $3 million to try to say that they don't have enough money. They had two prongs. They didn't have enough money themselves, and the rest of you who have so much less are doing okay, and it shouldn't be a problem. Now, I guess self-preservation is a very, very good motivator, but I've always felt you don't cheat children. And when children are in districts that are low funded, like less than $71,000 less than this average of the top 10%, something needs to be done about that. You don't stick your boot in the face of a child trying to come up the ladder. Let's just for fun, let's do the top 5%. Now that's M&O. Let's go back to 10%. Now, let's change it over to INS. That's at the state average. That is how much more San Angelo would have at that 23.1 if they were funded like the top 10% is on INS. Region 15. All right, let's look now at the total tax rate, including INS and M&O. How in the world can we worry about recapture being a problem when we're doing this to children in your districts? That's what the court case is about. The legislature's not focused on this. They're worried about recapture. They're worried about keeping that assetar for the districts who have thousands of dollars more. This is what they need to be worried about. This is what they need to be thinking about. Because if they need this kind of money more than you, if they need that kind of money, then your children should get it too. It's a statewide system. And if they don't need it, then why are we taxing people to give it to them? Why are we underfunding your districts so that they can have much more than they need? Wherever the amount is that's needed, every child should have access to that educational opportunity no matter where you are. This is Texas. We're all Texans, and we're in this together. You want to go to the... Now, I've talked to you about the money you're not getting for your children. Dr. Freeman is going to talk about something that adds to that.
I just want to say again how much we do appreciate being here with everybody tonight. And Carl and Jeff, if y'all would just go ahead and send the check by mail, Dr. Pierce will appreciate that very much. we kid with them a lot, but they really are outstanding administrators, and San Angelo's blessed with good administrators and good board. We have several other administrators with us too, and all of you are. You know, one of the things you find out about the state of Texas as you travel around and you talk with school administrators and school board members is we have a lot of good people that care about kids. And they're across the board, small school, large school. We're blessed with that. What we're not so much blessed with is folks that are willing to take action on a statewide level to fix the problems that we've been talking with you about. We have good people at the legislature that care about kids. We just have a hard time getting enough backbone to go ahead and do the things we need to do to fix the system, and that's part of what we're talking about. The rest of the story, what Wayne told you, as we kind of go through these numbers, one of the things Wayne told you was that $70,000 per classroom that we were looking at differential. It is exponential by the time it gets to your community and the impact that it has on your community. There's an economic impact more than just the school district that is involved with the money that your school district doesn't get. One of the main things, one of the main principles, economic principles that everybody associates with new money into an area is that it grows the local economy. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars over the last several years trying to draw new money to the state of Texas to grow the economy of the state of Texas. Well, it works the same for your local school district and your local economy. The sources talk about it from the standpoint of every new dollar has an impact on the local economy greater than that dollar. There's a couple of terms. One's primary impact, and of course that's the local dollar. Well, in the school district, each new dollar of state or local funding that your level of funding goes up makes an impact on your school district, but it also impacts your local economy, and that's the secondary impact they talk about. And that's more than just the dollar spent in the school district. For the long term, each new dollar or portions of it, according to economists, can be respent in the local economy up to 8 times. That's a multiplying effect that that expenditure, that money has or doesn't have if you're not getting it, if you're one of the lower funded districts. And so when we look at whether or not equalizing the problems that Wayne talked about in his part of the presentation for San Angelo and the school districts in Tom Green County and in Region 15, whether or not that makes a difference, well, let's look at some total numbers. When you look at this, there's 2 charts that are basically identical, except the first one associates San Angelo ISD, the second one Tom Green County. And so when you look at these first 2 rows, up here on the top row, San Angelo is compared with the wealthiest 20% and with the wealthiest 10%. And then this second one is Tom Green County, wealthiest 10%, wealthiest 20%, wealthiest 10%. And then the next slide I'll show you will be the attendees and then Region 15 as a total. But as you look at it, what it does is it totals up the losses we talked about. The M&O loss, that's $70,000 per classroom for San Angelo at the wealthiest 20% level, multiplies out to $26 million a year that should be additional funding at that tax rate for San Angelo. The INS loss is $42 million. For a primary impact, just the money to the school district would be $68 million. Now remember, this is where we put everybody at the same tax rate, $1.07, so whether you're there or not makes an impact on that. We put everybody at 23 cents, but either way you go, you would either have more money to spend on the kids as you needed it, or you would have money to even give a tax cut if you could, if you had that additional type of funding at your school district. And one of the biggest inequities in the state is in INS funding. The INS funding is, as like Wayne said, it's the area that's not recaptured. You have a funding level of $35 per student up to 29 cents a tax effort. Above that, there's no state equalization. But if your wealth is above that level, then you raise whatever you can get, and you keep it all. There's no recapture, and so the funding levels for districts on INS go extremely high. And we'll get Wayne when we get through to say something about how INS is being used by wealthier districts to fund M&O purposes. So you can see out here you have San Angelo at 20%, $68 million impact, comparing it to the wealthiest 10%, $117 million for the other ISDs, all the ISDs in Tom Green County, 91 million, 153 million. That'd make a difference in the school district and the local economy if you pumped in that kind of new money to the local economy. If you look at the districts in attendance tonight, the difference is very similar to Tom Green County, 87 million if you compare it to the wealthiest 20%, and 146 million, the wealthiest 10%. And for the region, all the school districts in Region 15, it would be 227 million if we were funded at the same level of the wealthiest 20%, and 408 million at the same level as the wealthiest 10%. Somewhere in there, we're talking about real dollars. You know, we're talking about money that would make a difference. But if you look at secondary impact, there's lots of different economists that have different numbers of what to use, but we use the number on secondary impact for $3.65, which seems to be kind of in the range that a lot of economists use to say this is the secondary impact that new money has on the local system. And so we use that multiplier, and so when you get a primary impact of 68 million, that turns into a secondary impact of 250 million for San Angelo, or Tom Green County of 332 million. If you look at the attending ISDs, it would be 317 and 534 million. And for the region, if you look at comparing it with the wealthiest 100 districts, actually it should be wealthiest 10% of districts, which is basically the same districts. It'd be 102 districts. You have a $1.5 billion almost for the whole region. Then you add those two numbers together for the total impact. And so the numbers for the total impact for San Angelo ISD compared to the wealthiest 20%, 319 million compared to the wealthiest 10%, over $500 million, over $500 million. Tom Green County, even more than that, 424. If you look at the districts in attendance, 405 and 680 million, and then for the region, 106 billion and 101.9, almost $2 billion. And that's an annual amount of money. That's what the state having an inequitable funding system means to the school districts that don't get the money. At some point in time, the state has to fix that. And the only way they fix that is if we, as the citizens of those districts funded at those levels, tell them they have to fix it. Doesn't it boggle your mind just a little bit? I mean, every time Wayne and I look at the numbers and every time we go through the numbers, they're so large, it just sounds like it can't be that bad, but it is. That classroom disadvantage that he showed you are the true numbers across the state. Those are the numbers we produced for the court case. And the numbers that we produced for the court case, none of them were proven wrong by the state of Texas. They couldn't find a single spot in any of our numbers that we were incorrect on. And we're talking about exhibits for the lawsuit where you put a notebook here, it'd been that thick, 2 of those, full of exhibits for the lawsuit that we produced. And they became the basis for the judge's decisions on equity. Any questions on that? Any comments? Wayne, you want to talk just a little bit about INS?
Whenever you look at the gaps, one of the gaps you don't see, one of the funding advantages is when you use INS for M&O purposes. Now, there's not really a benefit to a low wealth district to do this. But if you use the money from the INS and I would do this if I were superintendent of one of these districts, because you're always wanting to do what's best for your district. You can take the INS funding and you can use it for things like technology and so forth. You can use it for summer repairs and other things like that most lower wealth districts would have to use M&O for. Well, that would enable them to use that money for teacher salaries and other things because they're not having to buy those things. Now, I don't fault them for doing that at all. As I said, I would do it too, and I think you would too if you had the opportunity. But we have to focus on those people who aren't getting all of these things, and we have to bring them up. Nobody wants to bring the top down. We've been accused of that occasionally, that we are going to bring the top down. That's counterproductive. That doesn't help anybody except for some that are just irrationally high. You got some that have 2-3 times what those of you in the room, the best funded in this room, would pale by comparison. We need to bring the bottom up. That's where we need to put the resources. You saw the billions of dollars we have. We need to quit worrying about recapture. We all pay it. We need to just accept it as part of an equalized system to balance things out and take the resources of the state, and we need to raise it for everybody. And if we do that, if this court case turns out well enough and we're able to get the legislature just to treat children and taxpayers fairly, that's all we're asking. We're saying take away all of the things that aren't related to cost and start recognizing the things that they're not funding that are related to cost. Because there's lots of things the state's not funding through that little red box. So that's our story. That's our plea, is for you to share that with your representative and your senator and ask them just to give us the same deal that the state has for so many years been willing to give others. Our kids are just as important. Their futures are just as worthwhile. Treat our children and our taxpayers the same way you do everybody else. That's all we're asking. Okay. With Jeff, Carl?
Dr. Bright, I just want to give a quick thank you on behalf of our school district to Wayne, Tidra, and Ray. I can also speak as a first-time superintendent. This is extremely valuable, and we are very fortunate to have Dr. Bright and his staff. And his nickname around here is Dr. No, but because he understands school finance so well and utilizes his network, he actually says yes quite often. So we're excited about the work Jeff does for us and our school district to benefit kids, and thank you so much for being here. I do have a question. I may not be savvy enough to pick it up. It may have been in your last comments. But I've read recently about a tax swap. Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about that, where the overall tax rate of the district is maintaining, but they're swapping to INS and M&O. And
what has happened is that there are, first of all, in 1999, they put in an equalized system where they gave money to the people on the very bottom to help with INS, your INS tax rate. So let's suppose that you're able to raise this much per ADA with a penny of INS tax. Then the state would guarantee you up to $35 per ADA. So if you could raise 17, they would give you 18. And you would end up with $35, and that was a guarantee. And as you, say, went up to 20, then they would give you 15. We've gotten to a point, they never were 50-50 with this. They got up to around 30% in the beginning, but now they give less than 10%. Less than 10% of the money for all INS across the state, all districts. Less than 10% comes from the state. Over 90% comes from those districts. All right, so that $35 that was set in 1999 hasn't increased, even though the cost of construction is doubled. Should be around $70 just to stay even. It hasn't. Since 1999, it's been at that same guarantee level, and they haven't gone up as inflation has hit. So that's not a very high level. If you put it on a per WADA basis, it's like $24 at best for a district per weighted student, $24 guarantee. Well, you take the worst funded part of M&O is at $32, $31.95. $32. So there's a difference on your INS side of what you would get from the state on the INS versus what you would get with the upper pennies on the M&O side of about $10, a little over $10 per weighted student. And that's a good bit of money. So what these districts are doing, because they're in such a tight, and because the state has this $1.04 cap before you have to go out and have a vote before you can get above $1.04, and people generally, they have trouble getting, some districts have impossible for them to get above it. So what they do is they go to their community and they say, look, we have this INS tax rate, you've already approved it, and we can set it at whatever the level is necessary to make our debt payment. That's what you've already agreed to. But we have built up some money from penalty and interest or one thing or another, and what we would like to do is we would like to reduce our INS tax rate by a certain number of pennies, and then ask the community to support going above the $1.04 by those same number of pennies, so that to the taxpayer, the total tax rate stays the same. It's just fewer pennies on the INS side and more pennies on the M&O side, an equal amount. Now, there's some trust involved in that, because the board's not going to give up the authority to set that tax rate to pay the debt payment, because you're required by law to do that. But what has happened across the state is people have held to that lower INS rate, and in the process of taking more pennies over here, no difference to the taxpayer, and you're getting an extra 10, 12, or more, that's the least you'd get, dollars per watt. And over the course, how many watt do you have here, Jeff? Rough. 17,000. So 17,000 times say $10, $15 per penny. That's per penny. That's a lot of money difference. So you're able to get that money and spend it on your children at no increased cost to the taxpayer. It's just choosing the pennies that bring in the most state guarantee, the highest state guarantee. And use those instead of using some that bring in the lowest state guarantee. Does that explain it?
Yes, sir. I'll just get Jeff to draw me a picture and we'll be in good shape.
Have the election?
Yes, if you go above $1.04.
Can you extend your debt further out?
No.
No.
No, if you have money, then you can use other funds. You can even use any funds, M&O or INS, to pay on debt. What you can't do is you can't say, we're going to set a $1.17 tax rate, and 7 cents of that is going to go to pay debt. You can't do that. You have to take it out of fund balance, but then, it replenishes. And so you end up being able to use that money or money that you've saved. Sometimes in INS, you'll have funds in there that came in. Say you set a tax rate and you over-collected more than what your debt is. You can use that money to make the payment and make the difference. So basically, you keep the same schedule for paying your debt. It's not extended out. It's the same schedule for paying your debt. You're just able to keep a little extra money for local than what you were getting. You're using pennies that are guaranteed at a higher level instead of pennies that were guaranteed at a lower level. So you're bringing in more money than what you would have otherwise. So you have plenty of money to pay for your debt. Okay.
So Mr. Parker or Dr. Bright, any other questions?
For this last issue about the penny swapping? No, for this? One is they don't want to spend the money. Right now, the lieutenant governor just gave the studies, interim studies out, the second phase of them, and he did not ever say, what does it cost to educate a child? He didn't say, what are we funding the lowest kids at? He said he wanted them to look at school choice. And it's all about, and it's ideology, not functional business-like stuff. It all has to do with we want to just open up the schools and everybody gets a voucher, and you go out and you hire somebody or you do whatever you want to. We don't do that for the military. Like if you think about it, we fund the military kind of like we do the schools. It's just, taxes is what goes to fund. And it would be a huge mistake to say we're going to give everybody a voucher and you hire your own military. You get together in groups and you can hire your own militia. I mean, that would be foolish to do. Well, it's the same thing with public schools. But the ideology is that we want to just open it up and let businesses come in, for-profit businesses, and make a profit off of education of your kids. And that's where the Senate especially is pressing. But for the others, it comes back to money. And they have plenty of money.
Can I say something else too? Are y'all familiar with the TPPF, Texas Public Policy Foundation? They're an organization in Austin that's very influential with a lot of the members of the legislature. They carry the weight. I guess Bill Hammond is the Oh, that's business. Yeah, the one for, well, I can't think of the guy's name with TPPF, but they have. We were meeting with them a couple of weeks ago. Wayne and I was, and we were meeting with them, and it's very much their philosophy and what they're trying to propose is a free market concept of schools ought to be funded on a free market. In other words, every parent have a voucher and they can decide where they want to go and that kind of thing. And that's what you're fighting in Austin. That ideology that Wayne talked about. There's a big push of people in that group wanting to do something like that. And so one of the main battles that public education in general faces is that type of pressure that the members of the legislature face. Other questions? Anybody?
I've got one. It's my understanding there's a pending vote in the future about homestead exemption changes. How will that create? Will it create a differential burden on wealthy districts versus property poor districts, or will it be about the same burden?
Say your question again. Just so.
My understanding is there's going to be a vote on changing the home
Right.
exemption, right? How will that burden be the same across all districts, or do you see that burden being more so on property?
Yeah, no, it very much that burden. Well, what it will do, there's a new hold harmless they've created to cover that particular proposition if it passes, which basically says you're not supposed to get any less money from the new homestead exemption than you were getting before. Well, for school districts that are in the formula, if your property values go up or down, the formula adjusts for that, and so it doesn't help you or hurt you particularly for that. So the hold harmless only works for wealthy districts or districts that are receiving target revenue, those above the formula. And so it does hurt the districts in the formula, like San Angelo, from the standpoint that it takes money, $1.2 billion, I think is what they budgeted in the budget to cover the cost of that hold harmless. It takes that money out of the monies that could flow to fund the basic allotment and the rest of the programs to drive your funding level up. And so, yes, the basic bottom line to your question is, yes, it hurts the poor districts because we're spending money not on a cost-based function. We're spending money to guarantee folks that are already getting the most to start with. Does that answer the question? Right. There's no difference in the revenue. Any other questions? I know we are probably a little bit past time, but we certainly don't want to wear out our welcome. Thank you all very much. We appreciate everything.